I'm real excited about this video. I'm going to be reviewing a video here about how the US stole the Philippines. Now, I've been hiring people in the Philippines for 11 years, 11 and a half years. And a few years ago, I filmed a video. It's got millions of views. It's why I hire people in the Philippines. But in that video, Scott Christopher and I were chatting, and he shared some of his wisdom about how the USA rescued the Philippines from Spain, you know, and that's how he painted the picture. And on that video, there's comment after comment after comment like, that's not exactly how it happened. And so I've looked things up and I kind of understand it a little bit better. But this video here, I know the guy that is doing this episode. When I saw it, I'm like, oh, I'm totally gonna react to this. And I wanna see like how he paints the picture. He usually does things in an accurate way. So let's check it out and watch.
There is a cluster of 7,000 islands that looks like one of the most beautiful places on Earth.
I just have to say, when he showed those pictures of the beach, it like totally took me back. It was only like 18 or 20 months ago when I stayed in that bungalow on that beach. Anyway, besides the point.
And while all of these advancements were happening here on these islands, another group of humans had been evolving in another part of the world, over here in Europe. But this other group had a different culture, a different religion. Many of their advancements were achieved through expansion, not collaboration.
Okay, so we know who the villain is so far. Spain is the villain here.
These islands, these people, this culture would soon be swallowed, stripped of what made them them. And soon their name would be changed, after the name of the king of their conquerors.
So that's something that I had forgotten, but King Philip II is what the Philippines is named after. That's quite telling.
The story of these people offers a new perspective to anyone who will listen. It's a perspective that has been wiped from our history books because of the inherent discomfort and tension with this fact that the United States, once a colony that heroically threw off an empire to become independent, soon became an empire itself. It contradicts our founding belief that it is, quote, self-evident that all men are created equal. And this story isn't just history.
Okay, that's a pretty bold statement. It's one of the more bold statements he's made in his videos, which a lot of his videos are really good. There's a couple of his videos that I don't agree with, I just have to say.
This video could be called How Spain Stole the Philippines.
So he keeps showing that roundabout, that big circular road there. I don't know where that is. I wonder if that's a pretty iconic place. I'm just curious.
This video could be called How Spain Stole the Philippines, since Spain was the first nation to conquer and control these islands like 500 years ago. Actually, exactly 500 years ago. And indeed,
that's cool.
Spain left a very deep influence on these islands. Spain brought their religion, their language, their culture, which is why the most common last names in the Philippines are like Reyes or Del Rosario, De la Cruz, De los Santos.
So that's interesting. You know, it says 500 years ago is when Spain came and kind of took over the Philippines. I didn't realize how long ago that was, and it's been several hundred years. Obviously before America was created, and then America's involvement. So this is interesting.
Okay, so it's the end of the 1800s. Up until now, US expansion sort of looks like this. It's all happening on this mainland. And at this point, there sort of became a big debate of like, do we keep going? Some people wanted to keep expanding the US outside of this mainland. The president at the time wasn't a big expansion guy, but he was surrounded by people who loved war. Specifically this guy. And these people who surrounded the president had their eye on this Spanish colony right off the American coast called Cuba, where the locals were rising up against Spain. Wait a minute, isn't this a video about the Philippines? Why are we...
He always does this. He's like, wait a minute. No, but I like this history. I never knew this history. I never knew that Spain controlled Cuba. I had no idea.
Talking about Cuba. We're getting there in just a second, okay? So anyway, Cuba. Americans didn't want to go to war with Cuba. They're like, we don't need more war. but thanks to the explosion of an American submarine in Cuba, which was probably an accident, and thanks to some highly unethical journalism that blamed the explosion on Spain, and a big thanks to, again, this guy, Teddy Roosevelt, who at this point was just a peon. He was literally the Assistant Secretary of the Navy. But he somehow cajoled his boss's boss, the President of the United States, to go to war in Cuba to liberate the Cubans from Spain. So the US declared war on Spain in 1898.
So he's really good at storytelling. It seems like he's dragging it out, and yet, he's keeping me interested, but he's going through the facts really, really slow.
But soon, it's not just Cuba. The US, really meaning Teddy Roosevelt, who again is just an Assistant Secretary of the Navy, he's not a big decision maker. He somehow maneuvers the situation to say, let's liberate next door Puerto Rico. And while we're at it, let's go into the Pacific and liberate Guam and the Philippines from Spain as well. Teddy didn't even ask his boss to do this. He literally sent off a cable to the Navy commander in Asia that was like, George Dewey, go attack the Philippines where Spain is. That is what your mandate is.
That I would have had no idea. So Teddy Roosevelt, not a big leader in our country at that point, he's the one that made the decision to go to war against Spain in the Philippines. That's interesting that it wasn't even known by the president.
The US arrives to the Philippines and sees that the locals had already been fighting against the Spanish for years. The Spanish were weak and were totally declining.
That is cool. So that's something that I've heard, and I learned a lot in the comments, is that the people of the Philippines had actually been fighting the Spanish and winning. He mentioned here that Spain was really weak there. I didn't know that though. That's really cool to hear that confirmation.
And the US shows up and is like, let us liberate you. And the Philippines were like, well, we've sort of already been fighting this bloody war for years against the Spanish. So George Dewey, this Navy commander, and his fleet show up to Manila. Meanwhile, back in the US, people are like, wait, weren't we just supposed to invade Cuba? What are we doing in the Philippines now? And the US government's like, because the Philippines is a perfect hub for commercial opportunities in Asia, and we think that if we don't take it, Japan or Germany might take it, which would clearly diminish our geostrategic advantage in the Pacific. No, they didn't say that. They said, we want to liberate the people of the Philippines. So the Spanish see the US arrive to the Philippines and they're like, great, we're done. So the Spanish military commanders asked to meet with the US military commanders. They meet in secret, and Spain's like, listen, I know we're losing, but we really want to save some face here. We don't want it to look like we lost to the...
I remember this part. Okay, so America meets with Spain. I was thinking it was talking about America meets with the Philippines. But America meets with Spain. Spain says, we're losing. So how about you just buy this from us? Pay us some money. That's what I bet he's going to say next.
US commander's like, okay, there's an opportunity here. We said we were here to liberate the Filipinos, but we haven't promised anything yet. So we would much rather it look like the US defeated Spain instead of helped the Filipinos defeat Spain. So together, the United States and Spanish militaries organized a fake battle. I
didn't hear about that.
The US would fight the Spanish in
I wonder if that's true. A fake battle.
Manila, and the Spanish would intentionally lose. Oh, and the key detail in this whole plan, they would not let the Filipino fighters, the ones that had been doing all of the actual fighting against the Spanish, join them as they stormed towards the walled city to deal the final blows to the Spanish Empire. And this would mean that the Filipinos technically didn't gain their independence. It was actually the US who conquered the Spanish, and then the Spanish were like, oh, can you give us $20 million for our troubles? And the US was like,
so this is an interesting story. I'm really curious, how accurate is that? Was there really a fake battle between the US and Spain?
yeah, sure. So now the US wins the war and they claim sovereignty over the Philippines. So yeah, this happened.
We claimed sovereignty over the Philippines, huh? So I thought that there was a money exchange, like USA bought the Philippines from Spain. Anyway, let's see if he mentions that.
They won the war. Meanwhile, back in the United States, they got to keep up this white savior liberation narrative that they created to justify going to war with Spain. The US had to frame this not as conquest, but as the honorable duty of the US to civilize these people, or in the words of the SOPAD, quote, to brighten the dark corners of the earth. Jeez, this is insane and was not that long ago.
That is pretty insane.
This is where things really heat up. It's 1900 now. Spain loses the war, obviously, and the US now owns Puerto Rico, Guam, and they claim the Philippines. But the local Filipinos who've been fighting for their freedom for years are like, no, 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 no. You just waltzed in here on our rebellion and conspired with the Spanish to make it look like you were liberating us. No, this is our country. We don't need another colonizer.
So I think that everyone that watched my previous episode about why I hire people in the Philippines, when we had that exchange about the incorrect history, I think they're all gonna love this episode. Most of it, I assume, is accurate, is correct, and he's painting a good picture from the behalf of the Filipinos.
And this is where things really heat up.
So now I'm curious. He's got my curiosity going here. What's gonna happen? Or what did happen?
The Filipinos start fighting again for their independence, and this time against the United States. It is a pretty horrible, bloody war, one that I never learned about in school. It includes massacres of...
Yeah, I didn't learn about that either. And I haven't even heard about this part, that there was massacres or, war with lots of casualty and death.
Back in the US, the appetite for expansion continued to go down, and people sort of just forgot about the Philippines. They forgot that there was a war there. One newspaper summed it up by saying, Americans didn't know if the Philippines were islands or canned fruit. But the fact remained that the US went to war and now owned the Philippines, in addition to Puerto Rico and Guam. So this begged a very important question, one that hadn't been asked before, which is all of this land America? Are these people Americans? This was a huge question. And the answer to that question affects how we see these territories still today.
So I know that I'm only showing you parts of this episode as I review, but this is fascinating. I have no idea of this history. I have no idea of the current relations between USA and Philippines. I just believe it's good. We seem to have really good relations, but I don't know the history and I don't know how it stands. So you're probably going to want to go and watch this original episode after you're done watching this one.
And in this series of cases in the early 1900s, the Supreme Court decided that America was the latter, is the latter. They created a new category of land called Unincorporated Territories, where the people don't have any representation in the democracy, but where Congress could create laws on their own, particularly laws dealing with revenue, which would not be allowed by the Constitution for states within the Union. In other words, unincorporated territories are land we control and exploit for revenue, but whose people don't get to vote and don't get the right to trial by jury. So yeah, the Philippines, in addition to Puerto Rico and Guam, remained unincorporated territory.
So is it still that way today? That's what I want to know. Like, did something change? I know this originally started 100 years ago or 120.
And how far the Philippines had faded from people's mind became very clear in December of 1941, during World War II. The US had owned the Philippines for like 40 years, when a fleet of Japanese bombers flew across the Pacific and bombed an American naval base in Hawaii. But what we don't really remember is on that day, Japan bombed Guam and the Philippines, two American territories, as well as several other American and...
Man, how did I not ever hear this? Obviously, we know about Pearl Harbor. I've been to Pearl Harbor. I had no idea that the Japanese went and bombed the Philippines and bombed Guam because they were American territories. This is interesting.
Yesterday, December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy.
Here's the draft of this speech. This is the original draft that FDR spent the day marking up before he gave it. Zoom in a little bit and you'll see on this draft that it mentioned the Philippines originally, but FDR crossed it out. He crossed out the mention of Manila.
So it's interesting. His speech originally said Hawaii and the Philippines. It originally mentioned Manila, but just crossed out.
The Philippines was on some map somewhere. Yes, we technically owned it, but the people really didn't want to hear about it because these people weren't Americans.
So I have to say, I love when videos are well researched. I mean, the fact that he showed that document is pretty cool. I don't have stuff like that in my episodes.
After that day, Japan actually full-on invaded the Philippines. They didn't do that to Hawaii, but they did to the Philippines.
I didn't know that.
Until the end of the war, at which point the Philippines were finally granted independence in 1946.
Okay, so that answered my other question. So Japan invaded the Philippines, but then after the war, they were granted independence. So 46, okay.
And this "we own you, but you're not really Americans" precedent established by the Supreme Court still applies to 4 million people who live in unincorporated territories. Or let's just call it a spade a spade. Let's call them what they are. These are colonial possessions. The people who live here don't experience the full rule of law. They don't get trial by jury. They don't have full representation in our democracy. And they don't get to vote for the president. We conquered these places, but we didn't want to bring the people fully into the American project. We left them out. And there they remain today.
Okay. Wow, that was a ride. That was an interesting episode. I learned a lot. I have a whole different perspective. It actually wasn't what I thought, even from all the comments that I've seen on that video, because it's we've had thousands of comments on that episode about this history. And still, even with all those comments and looking into it a little bit of other YouTube videos I've watched, the picture wasn't painted like this at all. And to know that the Philippines is now independent since 1946, but to know that there's all these other territories that are property of USA, but they don't have the rights of being a US citizen or things like that, it's like, yeah, that is lame. That should be one or the other. Like, give them the freedom or give them the benefits, give them the blessings. All people created equal.